Hi, BonBon here. About 3.5 years ago, long before Cities Skylines 2 was even announced, I released a wishlist video on the assumption that the game was in production and maybe, just maybe, the devs might be interested in some proactive feedback. Now, as we hit the first anniversary of the game's actual launch, I figured it was time to take a look at how many of my early desires have been met and whether 2021 BonBon would be happy with the game as it stands today. This video isn't about the current quality of the game, as it is well documented that the devs are still hard at work fixing the issues that they expected to have completed by the game's release. This video is simply about how many of my preemptive desires have been implemented and to what degree. I'll do the 12 wishes in the order that I originally covered them, and will mark each one with a score between -2 and +2, to get an overall end result which will hopefully be higher than a middly 0. So let's get started with point 1. A better optimised game. And here there is much to argue. Is Cities Skylines 2 a well optimised game? Many players will tell you no. Personally, I haven't had any serious issues, but I'm running a decent rig, so shouldn't expect too many serious issues. But there are issues. One example is with the much lauded in-game camera system. I'm a YouTuber. I want to take nice videos of my city. My experience is that while the in-game camera has lots of bells and whistles, the tracking of the camera can be very stuttery, especially when changing directions. I'm also surprised that the maximum video time duration is limited to just 30 seconds. In CS1, the extended cinematic camera mod for the base game gave me far more usable results than the vanilla camera does here. But ignoring all that, my desire was for a better optimised game, and in full honesty, I find it very hard to argue against this. Pretty much all the hard limits have been removed, and I don't see the simulation grinding to a halt at the relatively low levels that we saw before. But I accept there's still a long way to go before I would be happy with the result, and as such I'll give this a score of +1, as overall it is better optimised than Cities Skylines 1. Next, more immersive realism, and for this one I have to give credit for trying. We have a number of item specific points I mentioned in the first video covered. Definitely the vanilla assets are visually far better. The animations are better, though I still think vehicle cornering motions are way too exaggerated. And additions such as the new chirper are definitely a bonus to the game, rather than an annoyance. There's an obvious attempt to make the Sims feel real so we could become emotionally attached to them. And yet, even with all the steps forward, Sims still just feel like numbers with random events pinned to them. So for this, I'm going to give another positive score, but it still falls a long way short of where I would have liked it. +1. Point 3. To incorporate the best mods from Cities Skylines 1. And this is actually a tricky one to score. I specifically mentioned Move It, Find It, and limited traffic manager functionality. What we got was relocating buildings, placing of buildings before roads, no search engine, and limited traffic management functionality tied into the development tree. Is this good enough? For a positive score? No. But also I think they did just enough for some credit to be given. There are shortcomings, but the new ideas are just enough to balance them out. Just. Score, a middly 0. Point 4. Not to lose all of the assets we already had from Cities Skylines 1. I admitted I knew at that stage that the assets wouldn't be directly compatible. It would be unrealistic and unreasonable to expect them to be. But to oversimplify, assets are just models. A mesh with a skin with some stats assigned. Surely it must be possible for mesh and skin to be imported from Cities Skylines 1 automatically assigned a generic set of stats based upon the building's category and level, which could then be edited in-game by the player to fit. What no one knew at the time was that Skylines 2 wouldn't use a Steam Workshop, and I imagine even if importing assets was possible, this might add an extra level of complexity, maybe even on a legal level. I don't know. What I do know is that there is no access to previous assets, and not even an asset editor at this point. This is a -2 situation. Point 5. Land ownership. This was all about breaking away from the grid system and assigning a parcel system, more like what we see in Manor Lords. Well, obviously no. But the inclusion of surfaces means that awkward shapes are easier to disguise, and so this isn't a complete loss. There isn't a parcel system, but we can try to hide it. So I'm scoring this a -1. Point 6 was for more zoning options. CS1 always felt like there wasn't much to do, beyond just residential, commercial, office and industry. CS2 has improved upon this, with a special mention to row houses and mixed use, but falling short on industrial options, meaning it's smokestacks or nothing. I have to give this a positive score, but 1 point rather than 2. Point 7. Water which acts like water. And I really don't know what to say. The water is definitely different, but it just doesn't feel right. Not right at all. I haven't sat and studied it for long enough to figure it out what it is I don't like. I just don't like it. But it is different, and as I can't quantify my dislike, I'm going to give this one a par for the course 0. Point 8. Pipes and power tied to roads. And I don't think there is any doubt that this is the big win. I've given this one 2 points and a round of applause. Point 9. The full first-person experience. More than just the first-person camera, I envisaged being able to actually have an avatar in the city. And nope. But the ability of the in-game camera to drop you in at street level does make it possible to feel connected to the city in a real-world observer way. I can't give this a positive score, but it could be further detached, so -1. Point 10 was one for the map makers. Full height map resource integration. The idea was similar to how we can browse the PDX workshop from within game, being able to grab and use height maps without the need of an external resource. Right now, we're lucky to have a map editor at all. This is a total fail. -2. Point 11. And I wanted Sandbox and real-time modes as standard. For the Sandbox, being able to drag and drop without the need of external mods to paint the city of your dreams without the need for meeting the game's mechanics. And that would have pleased the city designers. And a real-time mode where road planning, zoning and services would be planned out in a blueprint mode, and then the builders would come and construct in a pseudo real time. We got neither of these takes, just the same format as in CS1, which could have been the default, but for now is the only. A disappointing lack of vision, -2. And finally, point 12. Larger maps. It was always expected that larger maps would be the standard. Our imaginations went wild planning entire counties, states even. And what do we get? Well, you can't argue that the maps are larger, and so by default, I cannot award a negative score. But is the map size the smallest, bigger size we would have accepted? Quite probably yes. And as for the unsightly extended areas surrounding the playable area, this is borderline horrific in the vanilla maps. +1. And so on the scale of the 12 things I wanted to see in Cities Skylines 2 long before the game was even teased, and allowing for a year after launch for my personal whims to be met, because it is all about me after all. The overall score shows a moderate disappointment, and it would be fair to say that's pretty much how I feel. But that's my pre-game expectations. How do I feel about the overall gameplay and value for money of this much anticipated sequel to the best city builder of its time? Well, that's for another video. Until then, now's the time to subscribe so as not to miss any mod tutorials and the weekly workshop chart show. You'd be crazy not to. Big shout out to all the BonBonB buddies on Patreon and YouTube membership for supporting the channel. You guys rock harder than diamonds. And to all I say, thanks for watching, for commenting, for liking and for subscribing. I've been BonBonB and you've been very, very welcome.